Okay, hello again, Year 4. I'm in my comfy chair once more, and so I'm ready to read another scroll of the Roman Mysteries, the Thieves of Ostia. If you remember, we've now been introduced to a team of young people who are going to investigate what has happened to Jonathan's dog. There is Flavia Gemina, who's a young freeborn Roman girl. There is Nubia, the African slave girl that Flavia had bought so that she wasn't any longer in the hands of the cruel slave owner Venalicius. Jonathan, her next door neighbour, the Jewish boy. And then there is Lupus, who is a beggar boy who unfortunately cannot talk. He's named after wolf, because in Latin lupus is wolf. They are investigating what has happened to the dog, and their first clue is an aggressive man called Avitus that they met in the graveyard where he was sat beside his daughter's grave. And Flavia has promised Jonathan's father that she won't leave the street, but she's thinking to herself that her investigation can happen without her breaking her promise. So I think those are the things that I needed to remind ourselves of, and we'll start with scroll 11. Avitus might recognise the three of us from the graveyard yesterday, Flavia began. But if I pinned my hair up and put on a nice stola, and that's a sort of dress, and went with Lupus, I don't think he'd recognise me. The four of them were sitting on the marble bench in Flavia's garden while she told them her plan to find out more about Avitus, the man they had seen weeping in the graveyard. Disguise, cried Jonathan. What a good idea. Flavia explained the rest of her plan, and the others agreed it was a clever one. There's only one problem, he pointed out. For your plan to work, we'll have to clean up Lupus. I mean, really clean him up. They all looked at Lupus. You're right, agreed Flavia. It'll take a little extra time, but it has to be done. You'll have to take him, Jonathan, and Codex can go with you. She turned to Lupus. I know you've slept outside the baths of Thetis, she said with a grin, but have you ever been inside them? Roman baths were an important part of Roman society. It was a place where freeborn people would meet and socialise. They might do deals together as well as just enjoy their time in hot and cold baths and getting themselves cleaned and massaged. A few hours later, at midday, Flavia was reading book 6 of the Aeneid to Nubia. Suddenly Scuto, curled up at their feet, lifted his head and uttered a bark, and shortly afterwards they heard a knock at the door. We'll get it, Alma, Flavia called, and hastily put down the scroll. They're back, she exulted. Oh, I can't wait to see this. The girls hurried to the door. Scuto sensed their excitement and ran, barking after them, his claws skittering on the marble floor. Flavia slid back the bolt and threw open the door to reveal Codex and the two boys. All three wore large grins. Lupus, cried Flavia, you're clean. Your skin is 3 shades lighter, and they've cut your hair. Shaved it more like, said Jonathan, patting Lupus's fuzzy stubble. His head was crawling with nits. Even that old tunic looks cleaner, marvelled Flavia. They cleaned and pressed our clothes while we were in the baths, said Jonathan, stepping into the atrium. Show them your hands, Lupus. Lupus held out his hands reluctantly as he followed Jonathan in. They were almost spotless, and the nails neatly manicured. Nubia commented shyly. Smell nice. Scuto sniffed at Lupus's foot and then sneezed. Cordex, who smelled strongly of rose oil, closed the door behind them and took up his usual post. I don't think Lupus liked the steam room much, said Jonathan over his shoulder. But I couldn't get him out of the pool. He's a brilliant swimmer, and he was as happy as a newt in a puddle. Weren't you, Lupus? Lupus nodded as they went into the garden. You're not limping any more, cried Flavia. Oh, we both had a long massage, said Jonathan. I thought it might ease his aches and bruises. And did it? Flavia asked Lupus. For a reply, the beggar boy nodded again. Said Flavia. The only thing he needs now are sandals. He can't go anywhere in bare feet. I have some. I outgrew them last year, but they're still in good condition, suggested Jonathan. Well, you take Lupus, get the key and get them, said Flavia, while I change into a different person too. A girl and a boy stood outside a house with a red door at the bend of Green Fountain Street. The girl had clear grey eyes and wore a white stola. Her light brown hair was neatly coiled on the top of her head, though one or two strands had already escaped. The boy had green eyes and very short brown hair. His tunic was faded, but clean. Both wore bullers around their necks, marking them out as free-born citizens. The girl knocked again. Presently, an old man opened the red door, and after a moment, they all disappeared inside. Meanwhile, behind the same house in the graveyard, another boy and girl were climbing a tall poplar tree. The girl moved up quietly and fluidly, as if she had climbed trees all her life. She was beautiful, with very short black hair, dark brown skin, and golden eyes. Among the dark leaves of the poplar, she was almost invisible. The boy who followed her had dark, curly hair, a strong, straight nose, and eyes so dark they were almost black. Unlike the girl, he was not a graceful climber. He kept getting poked in the eye with twigs and leaves, and under his breath he uttered words a polite Roman boy should not have known. Just going to take a pause for a sip of tea. Or even a gulp of tea. Flavia looked around the atrium, the hallway. It had originally been the same size as the one in her house, but flimsy rooms had been constructed on either side, making it a narrow, dark corridor. An entire family seemed to occupy the atrium. She could hear a child singing tunelessly behind one of the curtained doorways, and a woman was washing nappies in the impluvium. Beside her squatted two runny-nosed toddlers, intent on a game they were playing with seed pods and pine cones. Novitus and his wife have the balcony rooms, mumbled the toothless old woman. Go through the garden and up the stairs. She didn't wait for a reply, but shuffled back to her cubicle and disappeared behind the curtain. The woman washing clothes nodded at them as they squeezed by, and Flavia murmured a polite greeting. Damp laundry hung from a washing line beneath the skylight, blocking off what little sunshine managed to enter the dismal room. A faint odour of stale sweat and frying onions hung in the air. Flavia tugged Lupus's hand, and they moved hesitantly down the corridor into what should have been the garden. Here, too, old rooms had been enlarged and new rooms built, so that the garden had shrunk to a few paving stones with weeds pushing up between them. A wizened vine struggled up a rickety trellis towards what little light there was. It was hotter in the garden than in the atrium. The family who occupied this part of the house had left the curtains of their cubicles open to catch any breeze. It was still siesta time, and Flavia glimpsed suspicious eyes watching her from low beds in the dim rooms. As she and Lupus started up the stairs, a young woman in a black stola appeared on the balcony above them. She had a long nose and a small mouth, and large, moist brown eyes. "Have you come to see me?" the woman called down. "We've come to see if Evita can play," said Flavia in her little girl voice. "My name is Helena, and this is my brother Lucius. We've just returned from a voyage." "Oh," cried the woman, and then said, "You'd better come up." She met them at the top of the stairs and led them into a small stuffy room with a low couch against one wall and a table against the other. A few flies buzzed around the remains of a meal on the table. The woman in black perched on a stool and invited the two of them to sit on the couch. Flavia noticed that some of the plaster was missing from the ceiling and one or two cracks snaked along the walls. "My name is Julia Firma," said the woman. "I have some very sad news. My daughter died several weeks ago." Lupus burst into tears, quite convincingly, Flavia thought. She pretended to pat him consolingly. Then she said to Julia, "But Evita always seems so healthy." "I'm afraid